What's up, my friends? It is Danny Gallows, of course, and welcome back to part number 7, I believe, of my Navy experience. Now, on today's video, I'm going to be discussing one of my favorite destinations of all time. It ended up being one of my favorite destinations of all time, and that was Hong Kong. Now, I've actually been to Hong Kong twice in my Navy career, but the first time I went there is what I remember the best. Now, in the last video, I talked about going to Dubai, and then I believe after that we went off to Hong Kong, or maybe Hong Kong or another location was first. Like I said, it's a little bit, my memory is a little bit fuzzy, but we ended up coming into Hong Kong one day. Now, let me tell you guys, if you guys have never seen pictures of Hong Kong before, if you guys have never experienced it in like a video or any kind of way before, it is a very, very magical place. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like, it's just kind of islands, these mountainous islands that you have in the port, because when we came into the port, you know, when you come into the port, you know that you're in Hong Kong, because I remember I was outstanding vividly, you know, I remember I was outstanding elevator watch, which means that we just kind of stood out on the catwalk there area by one of the elevators, waiting for you know to bring the aircraft up and down. Or I think it was actually a supply run. We were waiting to bring supplies up and down as we were coming into port. And we could tell that we were coming into port because very slowly at first these big tankers started coming in, these big ships, supply ships, you know, oil ships and cargo ships and all this stuff. And it started very slowly at first, right? Just, you know, ships here and there, here and there, here and there, and then all of a sudden, before we knew it, we were surrounded with cargo ships and oil tankers everywhere because, you know, Hong Kong has a huge shipping route. And then we came into port, and all I can remember about the harbor was that it was just such a majestic place, because there are these mountainous regions all around as far as the eye can see. You look over to the left and there's a mountainous region, and then there's a bridge that connects the two mountainous regions together. And then in front of you there's another mountainous region. And the mountains in Hong Kong, in China, are very, very unique. They're basically just huge hills almost. They just look like huge hills that look like they're almost covered in moss or something like that. It's really fantastic, you know, and you look all around and you see them. But the best part is being in the harbor and looking out over the city, because the actual city of Hong Kong is something like out of a dream. It's like entering another planet or something like that, because there are these big mountains, right? These big green mountains, and then from one end to the other end, as far as the eye can see, is one city skyline, continuous. Just imagine continuous buildings stretching all the way that way and stretching all the way that way. And then right behind the buildings, literally right behind the buildings, were mountains. And I mean, it's amazing. And then ships and oil tankers and cargo ships everywhere, just going from port to port to port. And you look over there, and there's like buildings and stuff in the mountains and stuff. It actually reminded me a lot of California, you know, like northern and southern California. You know how there are these big green mountains rising up out of the landscape, and then you see these houses kind of dotted in there, except that there's not as many houses, they're just sparse. But it's the same kind of landscape, except for that city, this massive city that's just spanning from one end to the next, and there are buildings like you've never seen before, especially at night, lit up in all kinds of colors and stretching high into the air. It was almost like being on Coruscant, you know, if any of you are familiar with Star Wars at all. It was like being on Coruscant, like literally being in the middle of the city. Now, what I remember though is our very first day. It was me and my buddy Phil, of course. You know, me and Phil, the little ball of energy, happy Phil all the time. He was amazing. He was my friend through all of these experiences. You know, he was my main friend through all of my these experiences. And of course, it was me and him on another adventure there out in Hong Kong. So you know, we got together. You know, he was my buddy for the adventure, because we had to have at least one friend going out with us on the adventure. And I remember that for the first time ever, we were exiting through the back of the ship, because the ship actually couldn't pull into the port. There was no port. The ship was just out in the middle of the harbor, anchored in the middle of the harbor, and being surrounded by these ships that were taking us into port. So we exited actually out of the back of the ship, went down the stairs, you know, and onto these little there were these makeshift makeshift platforms, steel platforms on the back of the ship that they attached to the back of the aircraft carrier, and that's where we exited and entered. And we got onto these little boats, and I remember the first boat that we got on was an open-decker boat. It was a double-decker boat where you could get up onto the rooftop, and me and Phil were sitting there on the rooftop, and we were chugging Red Bulls because we had been up the previous night. We were both on night shift at the same time, and we had been up all night, the previous night before, but we didn't want to miss the first day in Hong Kong because we didn't have duty. None of us had duty, so we were like, oh, we gotta go. I don't want to waste a day. I don't care if we've been up, all night. Like, let's just chug a couple of Red Bulls and go out. And we ended up being fine. We ended up being very awake and aware, and we got onto the shore. And as soon as we got onto the shore, there's like a special area for like Navy people. I don't know if it's like specifically for military all the time. I'm trying to remember. I think it was specifically for the military, or just like a specific area for military people, Navy especially, to go. And it was like a community center, like not a community center, but it was almost like a bar or like a restaurant or something, where you could order drinks and you could order food, and there was information and stuff like that. But that was just our jumping off point, because going into the city. If you thought that it looked cool from the boat, from the ship, as soon as you get into the city, it's quite another experience. Because being surrounded by these, tall buildings of all kinds of shapes and sizes, there's advertising everywhere. There's signs everywhere pointing this way, pointing that way. There's pedestrian bridges. There's a Ferris wheel in the middle. There's one building in the middle of the city that has the top of it. I'm sure maybe some of you guys have seen it in pictures, but it looks like this. Like the top of it looks like this. And it's like the highest structure in Hong Kong. And it's like I got to stand right underneath that thing and take a picture and look up at it. And I remember me and my buddy Phil went to this a guy called Mr. Softy. He was a Mr. Softy guy, from the ice cream trucks. And there was this really nice Asian guy running it, a really cool guy. We got some ice cream from there, and we just walked around the city. And the reason why the city is so unique is because of those unique that unique China landscape, those mountains. You guys got to imagine, here in America, we have cities that, we have cities in one area, and then a mile or so away, there will be mountains. Like a couple of miles away, like outside of the city. But in Hong Kong, the mountains are literally right behind the buildings. Like there's a skyscraper here, and then the mountain starts like right here behind it. I mean, it's like right there, and the mountain rises just as high as the skyscraper, and it's right behind the building. It's like the coolest landscape that you could ever see in your life. It's so magical, just walking around on the city and everything. And we ran into a traditional monk that was in the city that was passing out like pamphlets and stuff like that, and we got a chance to chat with him and conversate with him as best we could, but we just spent that day basically walking around the city and just experiencing things, taking a cab if we needed to, but very rarely, almost not at all. You have to walk around and you have to experience these things. But we made a plan actually to go to the Hard Rock Cafe that night, because the thing about it is, we did the same thing in Dubai. We did the same thing in a lot of locations, because the Hard Rock Cafe is in like almost, I think it is in like every single country around the world, and it's the one, what's the one, I guess you could say, like Americanized place that you can go, that that you can find in every city and every town and every place. So we made this plan to go to the Hard Rock Cafe that night, because that's what you did. As soon as you get off the ship, you go to a bar or you go to a restaurant or something like that, because you can't have those privileges of having like bar food and a beer and alcohol and stuff like that on the ship, obviously, while you're out to sea. So you have to rely on, restaurants and stuff like that when you're in port. So we made this plan to go to the Hard Rock Cafe, and it was great because they had ferries that would take us across the bay, all the way across the bay to another part of the city. There's two parts of the city basically that are separated by the bay, and the ferry was great. It was this old ship. It was like a wooden ferry, modernized and everything. But it was like this old wooden ferry, and you got inside and you could still see all the inner workings of the ship, and it had wooden paneling and everything. And we got to go across the bay basically at sunset, like while the sun was going down, and we were there, man. Like, I was there. You know, one of my favorite movies to watch is, like, you know, I love Rush Hour, you know, and Rush Hour 2 and stuff like that, you know, and I love to see like Hong Kong and like the bay and stuff like that in the movie. And, you know, I was there. I was in Hong Kong Harbor on one of these ferries that you always see on these travel shows and the movies and stuff like that. Like, I was there on Hong Kong Harbor, you know, at sunset, like traveling across on the ferry with all these boats and all these cargo ships and all these fishing ships, traditional Chinese fishing vessels and stuff like that. I was there on the harbor. It was really cool. It was amazing. And, you know, taking pictures and just having a great time and everything. And then we got across to the other ferry terminal, and the ferry terminals in Hong Kong are huge because there's a lot of people there, obviously, you know, and so the ferry terminals there are huge. There's these big, massive places with very long ramps, huge, wide ramps going up directly into the city. And by the time we got across, it was nightfall already, which gave us Phil. He had this. He was always into getting cameras. Every country we went to, he always went to an electronics store, and so he always had like the newest cameras on him, and it gave him the perfect opportunity there while we were on the other side of the harbor to get this great shot, this great panoramic shot of the city at nighttime, which was amazing. It came out a little blurry because he was still getting used to the settings on the cameras and stuff like that. And I still have a picture of it, I think, somewhere. But that was, yeah, it allowed us to get great photography while we were over there, definitely. But then we were into the other part of the city, basically. You know, like I said, the two parts of the city were separated by the harbor. So now we're into the other part of the city, and this was the more like residential area. This is the place where like all of the malls were, all of the shops were, all the restaurants were, the residential areas, just apartments stacked on top of each other, basically, as high as you could go. And just that part of the city I especially love so much because it was kind of like if you've ever seen pictures of if you follow anybody like on YouTube or something like that does like vlogging from like Japan and stuff like that. Japan has these very tight, narrow streets, right, where there's like apartments and shops together, right, and there's really like tight, narrow streets that go off in all these different directions. That's what that part of Hong Kong was like. These very small, narrow streets where the top parts of the buildings were apartments and the bottom parts were all shops, clothing shops or something to buy, and then they're like, you would kind of like weave through these narrow streets, these kind of like rigid, narrow streets that went off in all these different directions, and there were people selling DVDs and like you know, balloon things and you know, souvenirs and clothing items and unique postcards and all kinds of like trinkets and all kinds of stuff, all kinds of shops set up. And then, you know, there's movies playing. You know, I was really into watching Final Fantasy Advent Children at the time. Final Fantasy VII movie, of course. They made a movie after called Advent Children. And I was trying to find a copy of it somewhere that would play on a DVD player, you know, and I kept going to all these electronic stores. And that was another thing, electronic stores all over the place. Just floors and floors and floors of electronic stores, all kinds of stuff. Not just cameras and TVs and DVD players and cameras and stuff like that, but just stuff for electronics, just like, you know, microchips and fuses and wires and all kinds of just shop after shop after shop of all kinds of stuff. And it was so great. And then, of course, restaurants as well. And so we wound up at the Hard Rock Cafe, and we had a great time there. I remember we sat at a table where I sat under a guitar played by the guitarist of Alice in Chains. Alice in Chains, one of my favorite bands growing up in the 90s, and I sat under one of the guitarist's guitars. You know, he signed it and everything, and I sat right under. That was our table, and they had this. They had great food and great drink, and there's music going on and all this stuff, and of course we were soaking up the atmosphere of being in Hong Kong. And I remember that my buddy Phil wanted to do this 20-shot challenge. There was actually this challenge at the bar where they give you 20 shots in like the vial shot glass, the vial shot glasses. They gave you 20 different shots of just all different kinds of variety. You could choose which ones you wanted, exactly which one you wanted for each individual shot, but it was 20 of them. And the thing was that if you could finish all of the shots, you didn't have to pay for them. So my buddy Phil, of course, he wanted to do this and everything, and I remember that like he didn't get far, he didn't get far into it. I remember I think he did fairly good. He did about like 8 to 10 or something like that, but then he couldn't do any more after that. It was way more than he could handle. But there was a couple of guys there that were from our ship that weren't at our table, at the same table as us, that finished the challenge, that actually did the challenge, and they were very, very intoxicated to say the least. But that was the life, that was the life being out there. And yeah, we finished up our night, just eating and drinking and walking back to the city. And that was our first night in Hong Kong. Of course, we couldn't stay out anywhere, so we had to take the ferry back across the harbor, back through the city, back to our regular ferry, and then back onto the ship again. And then the next day they were there. We were only there for 3 days, and unfortunately one of the days I did have duty, so we were only out there for 2 days, or at least I was anyway. And the second day, though, was just as fun, because me and Phil, we went back out again on the boat, across the harbor into the little community center there for the military, whatever you want to call it, and back out into the city. And this time, on the second day, we had discovered the night before that there was this great kind of like market, they're going on that was way across town. So the next day we went out, we got a cab, and we went way across town. I mean, I remember going through these amazing mountain roads in Hong Kong. And yes, there are mountain roads in Hong Kong. They are quite amazing. And we were just going through, weaving, not weaving, but winding around these mountain roads, going past ocean vistas and strange architecture. The architecture in Hong Kong is just, like I said before, it's amazing. And there's architecture even out in the middle of nowhere in the mountains and stuff like that. There's these great buildings, these really unique looking buildings, this great architecture and everything. And so we finally wound up on the other side of the city at this great market. And this market was an authentic Asian market. It was amazing, authentic Chinese style market. They had Chinese style food, steaks and ducks and pig heads and stuff like that hanging in the windows. And you went inside, and it was all like this covered, tented kind of building. And there were T-shirt shops, and there were souvenirs, and there again, DVDs, electronics, and trinkets and stuff like that. And there were like traditional Chinese paintings and all kinds of stuff to do. This open and closed market. And I remember going inside a traditional Chinese painting studio, like an art studio, and looking through this guy's paintings. Amazing a local painter. But a traditional Chinese painter was just amazing. Like looking at all that work, because you don't get to experience that stuff. You know what I'm saying? I mean, when's the last time you guys have ever thumbed through the work of a local Chinese artist in Hong Kong, right? It's like this is culture. This is why I value these experiences so much, because I gain so much culture from these experiences. It's like you have to understand that, like, you absorb this stuff, and it becomes a part of you and who you are, and it makes you the person that you are. Yeah, and I remember like these little, they're like these little Chinese schoolgirls all dressed up in uniform, like all dressed in uniform on a school trip all together, and they gave me like a sticker, like a little Apple sticker or something like that, and I actually kept it on my sweatshirt for like a very long time, because it kind of like molded to my sweatshirt. It was a very sticky material, and it like molded to my sweatshirt or something like that, and I kept it on there for like a year after. It was a cool little kind of unique souvenir, another cool experience, and just being there, walking up the road, seeing even just being inside Chinese cabs in Hong Kong. The drivers are very polite, that they speak English fairly well, so it's really easy to get around and to understand. And yeah, we just spent a lot of our time walking around in the city and just listening to music. I remember my drummer Slopes was out with us one day, and we were out listening to the band Emery. I remember listening to Emery on the iPod, walking around Hong Kong. And then to finish out the day, we got back on the ferry, and we went back across the bay. And I remember my buddy Mike Wood was with us too. He was my manager for my band out in San Diego in 2010 when I went back out there. My good buddy Mike Wood was with us, and we went back out to basically across the bay to the other part of the city there, where all the residential areas were, because Phil wanted to check out the electronic shops, of course. And we ended up doing that, and while Phil was checking out the electronic shops and all the cameras and stuff like that, I really took my time to absorb Hong Kong for what it is, because the architecture there, even just in the residential areas, it's like incidental architecture. You know, it's not meant to be, it's not meant to look cool, but it does. Because in Hong Kong, like I said, there's just like apartments. When you get into these really, like the suburb areas, you know, suburbs in the city, you know, they're apartments like stacked on top of each other, like literally one on top of the other, in these kind of they're almost like concrete buildings, like these concrete brick kind of rock, you know, solid buildings, and they're just one on top of each other as far as they go. And there's all these ventilation fans and these clotheslines hanging in between buildings, and they're stacked in such a way that they almost look like, especially in parts of the city, like on the outskirts of the city, they look like Lego puzzles. They're almost like these jagged, square, like Lego puzzles, and they're all apartment buildings. And there's these weird fans coming out of the tops and on the side of the buildings, and like I said, you know, the clothing lines just strung across and across and across all the way on almost all the buildings. And I just took the time to stand there at night and just look at the neon signs and the narrow streets and see if I could see something going on in the windows and all the corner stores and all the shops and stuff like that. And I just, you know, took my time to walk around and absorb it, because it was such a majestic environment. You know, it's so strange being in a foreign environment like that, and just simply taking the time to look around and walk around. You can gain a lot of culture and a lot of experience just from doing that. And it was amazing. And I'm privileged, even though I lost most of my pictures, which I will discuss in a later video when I get into the rest of my life out in 2010 in California. But I was privileged enough to still, I'm privileged enough to still have some of those pictures around, and I still look at them from time to time just to study the buildings, just to remember where I was, and to absorb the environment and the atmosphere, because it was really amazing. And if you guys have you know, the money to go see Hong Kong, to go out there and experience it for yourself, you know, my advice to you is, what are you waiting for? You know, any of these experiences that I'm talking about, any of these countries that I'm talking about, what are you waiting for? You know, Hong Kong is a place that I would definitely go back to immediately. If I had the dowry, you know what I'm saying? But, you know, and I will get back there someday to do more travel videos and stuff like that. I definitely want to do that again someday. But Hong Kong was one of my all-time favorite locations, one of my all-time favorite destinations. And it was such an amazing city, such a magical city. And I hope that you guys get to experience it someday as well. Everyone should be a part of that city. And it was one of the most amazing times of my life, and just thinking about it now, I'm starting to reminisce again, you know. And that was it. Like I said, you know, we were there for 2 days, and then we were back out to sea again, and we watched the city slowly disappear behind us, and we watched the cargo ships slowly, you know, become sparse again, and then we were back out to sea and on to our next destination. And next up, I'm going to be talking about my time in a very, very popular country to a lot of different people around the world, Australia. That's right, I have been to Australia, and I had once again a magnificent time over there, lots of great experiences, and I will be sharing that with you guys on the next video. So I thank you guys for joining me for this part of my Navy experience. I hope you guys are enjoying this and you're looking forward to more stories from me in the future. So until next we meet, take care, and I'll see you later.